Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the edition of the Are We Idiots Show. I kind of stumbled on that a little bit, Richie.
Starting the day that way,
It
huh?
must be 2 weeks since the show, and I'm a little rusty, but welcome again, everyone. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, Richard Kroll.
Mark, Marcus, Weave, Elmer Flash. Great to be back. I'll tell you what, though, this time of year is where a little bit of depression sets in. You know, because it gets dark at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and it's starting to get cold.
Unless you're within our listeners in Moldova or something like that. You know,
They
we have a lot
love
of
us in Moldova.
Yes, yeah.
They never have to deal with this.
I don't have any seasonal, it's called SAD, right? Seasonal affective disorder or something like that. SAD.
You're sad in other ways.
I am sad in many other ways. And after you listen to this podcast, you may be even sadder. It's one of those really important topics, Richie, which I think our listeners are going to love. It's a sleeper episode. I'm convinced of it. At least I am.
So our audience will be sad they tuned in and be putting to sleep here.
Seasonal affective disorder and clinically sad after listening to the importance of birth rates. But we'll get to that in a second. Richie, do you have any tip of the day for our listeners?
You know, I do, and we're also heading into the holiday season, which typically means more festivities.
Festivus,
Kwanzaa,
Hanukkah,
Hanukkah. Don't forget Christmas.
Yes.
One of the big ones.
Yeah, one of the big ones.
Everyone imbibes, partakes in spirits a lot more this season. So my tip is around drinking alcoholic beverages, folks. And this would be a good one even in the summer.
Don't use them as a sedative.
No, I would actually recommend that. But what I would say is never have your first drink when you're thirsty. So think about it, especially when a mixed drink. You know, you get your vodka and tonics, vodka and seltzer, cranberry and orange juice vodka, whatever, or a beer. And you know how if you're thirsty, maybe you worked out and you didn't really eat or drink much, or maybe you're running around over to family or friend's house for the Eagles game. You didn't really drink much, hydrate, and you're kind of thirsty.
Yeah, in the summer, like a nice cold beer is good when you're thirsty, isn't it?
But when you crush that first drink,
Okay.
you're going to drink it 10 times as fast.
Well, for me, that's still a half hour.
For some like you, it could take a while. But it's going to get into your bloodstream quicker. If you don't have food and other water and other hydration in your system, it's going to get into your bloodstream a little quicker. It's going to get you buzzed quicker. It's going to it could mess up your night if you have a 3, 4, 5 hours, ahead of you of family party.
Partaking, yes.
So, folks, start with a glass of ice water before you have your first drink this holiday season.
And I think you've advocated, you might have even taught me this 25 years ago, to always have a glass of water if you're having a night of alcohol. Water every other drink or something is a good way to go, just kind of keeps you from getting too inebriated, keeps you hydrated because it's alcoholic beverages are dehydrating. And the only negative is you get up 14 times a night, especially if you have a 56-year-old bladder.
You're going to pee all night, but you won't have a hangover.
Yeah, there you go. All right, good tip, Richie. And I want to thank our patrons, Mark Zlotnikoff, Eric Weaver, George Muldoon, Mike Smalls, Chris Barbie, Scott Carney, and Alvaro Puga. And let me just say this, folks. You know, we've been at this for going on 2 years coming up here in a month or two. And it's really important that we get additional folks to help us. There's costs associated with this. And think back, especially people who have been listening since the beginning, think back of all the times you've had a chuckle, or you've laughed, or you've enjoyed, or you've learned about things on our show that you hadn't thought about before. We've given you a different perspective. Rich has entertained you. I know I'm really boring, but at least Rich has made you laugh a few times. And all I would ask is, what's that worth in a day and age where there's a lot of negative stuff in the news? We're trying to entertain, and we just ask you to put a price on that. And if you're able to, Give us a few bucks every month. Go to our Patreon site of our website, areweidiots.com, supporting listeners tab. Go to our Patreon link, and we'd surely hope that you would consider doing that as we go into the new year.
Also, you forgot to add, I've heard, I know it's a serious subject, but a handful of listeners actually said they've reconsidered suicide since listening to our show. But yet, there's another handful that said they're now actually considering suicide since listening to our show.
Well, yeah, that's. I never really thought of it, but maybe we should put that in our next ad campaign. We'll have to keep people in different stages. All right, I don't even want to go there. All right, Richie. So we're going to do on the show today, Idiot of the Week. Then we're going to talk about the importance of birth rates. I know you never really thought about that, but I can assure you, your eyes are going to be wide open after the show today. And then we're going to conclude the show. It's back. It's been missing for probably 25 episodes. The segment called When We Were Idiots. And Rich is going to amuse the listenership with a story. He's actually going to be a consumer reporter today as he tells his story. We'll get to that at the end of the show. So, Richie, I submit to you my two nominees for Idiot of the Week. A night near the Hollywood Walk of Fame would change a woman's life. Heidi Van Tassel was parked in Hollywood after having a pleasant evening out with friends at an authentic Thai restaurant. Suddenly, a man randomly pulled her out of her car, dragged her out to the middle of the street, and dumped a bucket of feces on her head, according to public records. It was diarrhea. Hot liquid. I was soaked. It was coming off of my eyelashes and into my eyes, Van Tassel said. Paramedics who came to treat me said there was so much of it on me, it looked like the man was saving it up for a month. Van Tassel was rushed to Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital after the grotesque attack, where she was tested for infectious diseases caused by contact with feces. She will need to be retested every 3 months. It's so traumatic. The PTSD that I'm dealing with is beyond anything that I've ever felt. There needs to be some kind of help for victims of these crimes. The man who attacked her, identified in court records as Jerry Blessings, was charged with battery and taken to jail. Blessings was described as a transient with schizophrenic and psychotic disorders. He doesn't need jail time, she said. He needs mental health care. I have empathy for him because he does need help. That's Now, the first question that came to my mind is, how was it hot diarrhea? If he was saving it up, what did he do? Heat it on a cook stove?
I mean, diarrhea is so nasty. It's just hot all the time.
It's like spontaneous combustion or something.
I think it spontaneously combusts upon itself.
So what do you think of that first nominee?
I don't even
Richie?
know what to say to that one. I mean, first of all, how do you what container is it in? How does
a bucket, I'm sure.
Maybe he was pissed off at the Thai restaurant.
Was he pissed off? Get it?
No offense.
Wonk.
Maybe he got his first bout of diarrhea at this Thai restaurant.
That's probably worse. What's worse, a Thai restaurant or a Mexican?
For diarrhea?
Yeah.
They're very close. So I honestly am speechless on what the heck to say about that.
I've started strong. All right, Richie. This one's a little less humorous, but still mind-boggling. Last week there was a big college football game, LSU versus Alabama. Did you
watched a lot of it.
It was a good game, and I like to vote for the underdog, and Alabama went down. Well, evidently it got pretty serious with one Alabama LSU game. Two lifelong friends had an alcohol-fueled argument over the LSU-Alabama game, which led one man, Christopher Honey, to shoot his friend. Deputies learned that the two men were at home when an argument broke out over watching the SEC football game. The argument eventually escalated to a physical fight. That prompted Honey to go get a shotgun and shoot his friend in the back of the neck and head as he retreated down the driveway. Per the report, Honey had then went back into the house to finish watching the game before he then surrendered to police. Sergeant William Bailey said alcohol is believed to be a factor. No kidding.
Surprising.
Honey was booked into jail Saturday evening on charges of attempted murder, second-degree assault, unlawful use of a weapon, and menacing. I didn't even know menacing was a crime. The victim was put into the patrol car and rushed to the hospital where he was treated for non-life-threatening injuries. So I guess he was a shotgun kind of spray, so I guess he kind of was further down the driveway.
It was buckshot. It wasn't a bullet.
It might have been buckshot. But Richie, taking college football way too seriously.
Well, the fact,
two alcohol-fueled idiots.
The fact that they list each other as friends is...
They're watching the game together. Start grappling.
Although, I'll tell you, at the end of this episode that we're doing regarding birth rates, I may want to shoot you.
Thankfully, I put the gun away.
So...
those are your nominees, Richie.
Well, let's see. The first guy, clearly mentally deranged.
How mentally deranged you have to be to think up a scheme like that?
I think you have to be beyond idiot. Like that's a different
save
category.
up your diarrhea for a month.
And it's still hot.
I'm sorry. That just makes me laugh.
It's
It
bizarre.
shouldn't, but it made me laugh.
I guess two buddies, two close friends. First of all, how's an LSU and an Alabama friends, right? As far as a fan of either school, the whole story doesn't make sense. But if you take a shot, I could see. I know plenty of friends that got in fistfights, but to shoot your friend while he's walking out and then go back and watch the game, like I showed him.
Did you ever get in a fight with any of your friends in an altered state or anything?
Yes.
Have you?
Yeah.
That might have to be one of those stories. One episode.
It never got to where fists were landed, but it was like break it up kind of thing.
We know you got in a fight with one of your friends. We won't go into the story here, but you actually drove home from Hoboken, New Jersey. I know about that story. We'll have to tell that one day.
Yeah, with that particular friend, it happened 3 or 4 times.
All right, Richie. So now we're going to shift. Oh, you didn't give me your summary. Did you actually say that?
I'm going to give it to the Alabama football fan that shot the LSU fan.
So we'll give it to the victim, right? Because he went to the hospital, but he lived. We'll give the $1 to him.
Or the actual idiot would be the guy that took the shot.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, so we're going to shift now to birth rates. And Richie, you probably don't know this. Well, you may figure this out. I'm a soft science guy.
Very soft.
Very soft science. And you may not know this. You've known me for 40 years. But my second favorite soft science, my first is economics. My second favorite is sociology or demographics. So I've always had a fascination with sociology, demographics. I read a lot of. I read reports from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
You love outliers.
I love outliers. It's another good data point. But I love this kind of stuff. And when you think about it, economics, and certainly when we get into the conversation, it'll become clear, economics is related to demographics in a lot of ways. So we'll get into it. And just some background for the listeners, there really wasn't very good statistics kept on birth rates, which is really what we're talking about today. And birth rates is really known as, and the stat that most countries use around the world, the universal birth rate stat is called total fertility rate. And the total fertility rate really wasn't tracked very well. They have some ideas, but it wasn't really tracked very well until the 1950s. And total fertility rate is the number of children born to a woman in her lifetime. And
as opposed to outside of her lifetime?
As opposed to outside of her lifetime. But obviously it's an average of everyone in a particular country or demographic. The worldwide fertility rate is around 2.4 children per woman.
And a white picket fence.
Yes. The replacement rate, just to keep it, we're going to throw around some stats here early.
We're replacing
what are these,
Legos?
Hold on. The replacement rate to be able to sustain a population is 2.1. So if women within a population are having 2.1 children on average, that population can continue as opposed to decline.
So we're on average a surplus of 0.3, hence overpopulation in some areas.
Correct. But here's the really the key aspect. The rate is approximately half of what it was in 1950. So in 1950, the birth rate globally was 4.7.
Really?
Right. So just basically, the population was growing in the 60s around 2.1% a year. It's now growing 1.1% a year globally, the population. All right. So why is that? Okay. So why?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Why is that?
First, there's three primary reasons. One, there's fewer deaths in childhood because medical care has gotten better and fewer babies die. And, let's be honest, this is way before the statistics we're talking about, but hundreds of years ago, if you had 5, 6 children, half of them would die, in their youth or when they were in childbirth. A lot of women died in childbirth, et cetera. The second main reason is greater access to the use of contraception, because that was a big thing over the last 50 years. And then thirdly, more and more women are getting educated and now joining the workforce globally. So what has happened, just to throw some stats around, in 1970, China's birth rate was 5.8. It's now 1.63. U.S., the birth rate in 1970 was 2.48. It's now 1.88. That's a 30-year low, by the way. France was 2.55. Now it's 1.97. Japan, 2.14 in 1970. Now it's 1.47. And Germany, I won't go into any more, but Germany was 2.03 in 1970. Now it's 1.47. So, as you see, there's a problem brewing. Most of the major industrialized countries in the world and the most educated and the most prosperous are all well below a replacement birth rate. So before we go any further, Richie, what do you think? And there's some other anecdotes I want to mention. What do you think about that? And we'll talk about some of the consequences of that. But what do you think about, about that and the ramifications for the world? Because there's a whole nother continent, mostly Africa, that have still unbelievable birth rates that are driving the world population.
Wow. Well, since I never even thought about this topic in my entire life.
Well, that's why you're on the show. You can just wing it off the top of your head.
I have to concentrate 50 years into this one thought. Well, I know there are all sorts of reasons, like you just mentioned. But in China, there's self-imposed ban on having a certain amount of kids.
We're going to talk about that. Yep.
You had a quota, and and obviously we've covered. This is like a microcosm of many topics we covered, but women entering the workforce and the traditional family starting much later, and the World War II generation where people were getting married when they're 18 and 19. Now people are not getting married or waiting till they're 30 or in their mid-30s.
Right.
People want to experience life as a single person and travel and everything. And
right.
I think there's a lot less emphasis placed on raising families. We were a farm. Majority of our country was a big farm, and
they needed help on the farms.
You need help,
right?
Not just for the farm.
It's actually labor. It was free labor,
and your family businesses, right? Kids started. Hey, I was 9 years old. I was working in the deli or the dry cleaner or whatever. So it's a trend. It's obvious. I never think about it, but now that you bring it up, it's an obvious one. Now, I'll ask you, what made you come up with this topic? Because we never even discussed that this was going to be the topic. And when you threw it at me, I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. And I may not want to do it. But now that you bring it up, I can see this leading to a lot of problems. However, my final thought is it might also be a good thing because as we're crushing nature and we're throwing our own world into the toilet with pollution and, like carbon monoxide and dioxide, carbon footprint, and flushing the oceans of fish and the plastic floating around. And, maybe it's a good thing too.
It absolutely. There's several dimensions to this. So to answer your question, where did the tie into the show come? Because I tend to think ahead a lot, and I tend to be a planner, and I tend to think way in the future. It's one of my strengths, but also one of my weaknesses. And I think a lot about the future of this country, our country. and what our kids and grandkids, what kind of country are they going to inherit? We'll talk about that at the end of the show. But as you might imagine, all these countries that I mentioned, but particularly France, Germany, all the Western European democracies, certainly Japan, Korea, the United States, all have a really big problem in that they're below the replacement rate. Combine that with the fact that people are living longer, better health care. There's not enough young people to support the old people. So Japan's having this problem. China's going to have this problem. China has a different problem on top of that with the one-child policy, which we'll talk about in a second. But the United States has a pending problem. The difference between the United States and, say, someone like Japan is that the United States has always been traditionally a big immigration country. So, yes, we have low birth rates, but we also have a fairly liberalized immigration policy, which I'm a big proponent of. That's why I think some of what this nationalism that Trump has and anti-immigration thing is bad overall. I'm not for open borders, but I think immigration's a good thing and we should value it. But you look at Korea, Japan, very kind of insular societies. They don't have a lot of immigration. They have very low birth rates, and their people live a long time. They're in a quandary where they're not going to be able to support their population through social safety nets.
Yeah, that's
was the origin of this topic because, Social Security, none of the candidates are talking about refining Social Security or revising Social Security. You mentioned I think you used the term Ponzi scheme on a show a couple weeks ago, and it's exactly right. When you have high birth rates and you have high immigration, you can let the Ponzi scheme go as long as you want. But like Bernie Madoff, right? When things start to go bad, that's when the Ponzi scheme falls apart. And that's what's going to happen with us, maybe not in our lifetime, but in our kids' lifetime and certainly in our grandkids' lifetime.
Yeah, I could see other smaller, less protected countries imploding upon themselves, especially as people live longer. So it's a polar digression where two things going in opposite directions.
Right.
I never really thought about it. You're really taking me off guard this evening. But yeah, I could see this leading to a lot of problems.
So here's what some countries, we'll talk about China in a second, but here's what some countries are doing to try to upend the trajectory. Denmark, very low birth rates in Denmark, just like a lot of Western Europe. They came up with a campaign, Do It for Denmark. It was an ad campaign, and they had, like women dressed in lingerie and stuff like that, and they wanted the Denmark citizens to procreate.
So it had nothing to do with families, just have sex with whoever and get them pregnant.
I think there was, they prefer it within family, but I guess they'll take any port in the storm. Singapore, Rich, partnered with a Mentos Mint. The Mentos Mints?
Sure.
I love them, by the way. National Night Out to let your patriotism explode. They basically were saying, they were promoting breath mints to have, people have good breath together and would get together.
Oh, I thought they were putting aphrodisiac-type chemicals in them.
Well, that might be the next step. South Korea, the government there, this is a couple years ago, decided to turn off the lights in all its offices at 7:30 p.m. the third Wednesday of every month, which the government dubbed Family Day, to help staff get dedicated to childbirth and upbringing. We'll talk about China in a second. Hungary, this is the latest one. This is actually just this year. Hungary will exempt mothers of 4 from income taxes for life. So, the Weavers should have moved to Hungary. We'd be
retired already.
Pay no more taxes. But no, isn't that wild that it's such a big issue for countries that the statisticians know what's going to happen and they're trying to change it.
Well, clearly, if they're doing drastic measures like this,
they're paying people.
This isn't just a fun infomercial. This is
no.
Hey, folks,
Right.
please rub some soft ointment all over you. And
Don't come to work.
don't come to work.
Free
Bathe in perfume.
Procreation day.
Have a couple bottles of champagne. Turn the lights down so you can't see your partner.
Throw some oysters in there.
Throw a couple oysters. Wow.
But let's talk about China, Richie, because China, it's in the news a lot, and everyone fears China. And, I don't think that's necessarily warranted. But back in 1980, right when we were getting out of high school pretty much, China went to a one-child policy. We already mentioned that in 1970, their birth rate was 5.8. Well, it's now collapsed to 1.63. It's still the most populous. I think them and India are the most populous countries on the planet. But what has happened? They spent 30. They discontinued that policy in 2016. So it was about 36 years that they had the policy. And what happened was quite, predictably, now they have a whole generation where the males totally dominate the females. Because of abortion was used as a form of sex selection, and if a Chinese couple was only allowed to have one, there was a preference in that culture for males. So what happened was millions, maybe billions, of girls were aborted over a 36-year period, and now, what happens? They have a lot of 36 and under that aren't able to find mates because there's so many millions and millions of more, maybe hundreds of millions, well, maybe not hundreds, but certainly tens of millions more men and not the women to mate with. So it's kind of ironic that they instituted this policy. And now they have a policy. Now they've reversed it because they realize the error of their ways. What do you think about that?
I guess there's not a lot of spring break weeks in China.
I mean, women can command whatever they want. Can you imagine?
How hounded must a woman
in China?
You walk into a nightclub and 200 guys try to tackle you.
We thought it was bad here. Did you know about that? What do you think about that?
I knew about it in general at a high level, but I didn't realize where it has gone since that. It's a problem, right? And you can't just manufacture 25-year-old women,
right?
Unless you import them from other. I guess that's going to be the next phase.
Well,
trying to get women from Scandinavia and Europe to, hey, come on over here and we'll pay for you to get impregnated by some of our good-looking Chinese men.
Who says they have to be good-looking? I'm afraid that they'll resort to cloning or something like that. We talked about this on a prior show. I think that ultimately that's going to happen. Human cloning is going to happen.
Wasn't there a Chinese doctor who was banned from the medical profession for cloning or a baby or starting to?
He was trying to, and but I'm not convinced that a country wouldn't do that. And
Area 51, it's going on right now.
No. You're talking to your brother-in-law. Go back and listen. By the way, we had a conspiracy theory show a few episodes back, and Michael Paget was our guest. He was big on that. Not that particular conspiracy theory, but he probably does believe something
I'm sure he has something about that topic. Absolutely.
All right, so Richie, let's move now to what this country is going to look like over the next 30, 40, maybe even 75, 80 years. And I have a couple of stats which will quite surprise you. What do you think, Rich, is the most fertile religion in our country?
In our country?
Yeah, in our country. We're talking about fertility rates. So
Mormon.
I gave you I gave you a hint last week. Yes, the Mormons. The Mormons of the major religions have a substantially higher birth fertility rate than other religions. It's 3.4 now. So you see that our current rate is 1.88 as a society overall, and they're at 3.4. It's
I
not.
can tell you why too.
Can you?
Yeah,
Let's hear it.
Quite a few friends that are Mormon. I worked for two Salt Lake City-based companies, and they are heavy anti-premarital sex.
Right.
So they look to get married early, start the families early, and they get busy quick and often.
Right. But I mean, that's one aspect of it. But why do they have more children? I guess that's
Because they get started early, and there's, whether you agree or disagree with the Mormon religion, they follow, I'll give them credit, they follow their rules and bylaws and mantras very closely, where, I'd argue a lot of Christians aren't adhering to, abstaining from premarital sex. They do.
yeah. But what does getting married early have to do with the number of children? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Because in order to have a lot of children, you typically have to start early. If you start in your teens or 20s, you can still have kids in your 30s and 40s. You have more time to have more children.
Okay, I guess so. I'm
yeah,
wondering if it's another dynamic.
Well, if you start, look at the rest of the world. Let's say
I wonder if it's more cultural within the Mormon faith that it's expected that you have big families. I don't know if it has anything to do with the time of marriage.
I'm saying that's an absolute helpful contributor.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at my wife's grandparents. They got married when they were 18.
Right.
They had 11 kids because they were able to have kids over a 20-year period. I, on the other hand, was a late bloomer. When my wife had our first child when she was 40, she's not going to go have 11 children over the next 20 years.
Right, but that's an extreme, I think. Whatever. I mean, I guess it has something to do. I think it's more of the Mormons, and we'll talk about the Amish in a second. Amish and even Orthodox Jews, they have a much stronger adherence to their faith and lower, deflection, not deflection. What's the word I'm looking for? Like when you leave, defection rate. Defection rate. They have a much lower defection rate. So all those faith and Amish. I think the Amish. I'm going to look at it. It's close to 6.0, the Amish birth rate, and there's only about 300,000 Amish. But if you start doing the math, and if they're doing at 5 and 6.0, Mormons are only 3.5, which is really high. But if Amish are almost twice that, I mean, in 100 years, the Mormons and the Amish are going to, and the Orthodox Jews are going to rule over all of us. They're going to be the majority.
The Amish makes sense to me as well because they're throwbacks, still living on farms,
right?
Still using horse-drawn buggies and living off the land, and
right? Yeah,
getting married very early and working very early and homeschooled and all that kind of stuff. So
right.
They're like America was 100 years ago.
And it's funny. I actually read that an Amish woman has, without a phone, has a higher birth rate than one with a phone, which I guess also
you mean an iPhone or a
no, just a phone because
any kind of phone.
Any kind of phone, yeah. So if you don't have a phone, I guess it's kind of like if you don't have any technology, what do you have? You have more time for getting busy.
This information could be used indirectly as tips to some of our couples and friends out there that are looking for ways to spice up their love life.
Don't have a phone. Convert to Mormonism.
Start a farm.
Shun all technology. Drive a horse and buggy. You'll be so depressed you'll have sex.
With anybody.
Lastly, the Orthodox Jews also in this country, and we grew up in a high school that had a good number of American Jews, but very few Orthodox Jews. And what is happening in the Orthodox Jewish community is they too are having children at very high fertility rates, very low defection. My brain's working. Defection from the faith, and it's projected that overwhelmingly Orthodox Jews will outnumber all other Jews in the United States within another 30 years. So it's funny, when you start projecting about and we'll go to that at the end, what the country will look like demographically. You're going to see a lot more Hispanics. You're going to see a lot more Mormons, Amish, certainly Orthodox Jews. They're going to become bigger aspects because as these things contribute over time, if a population doubles every 30 years, it doesn't take very long before they're substantive. Where they're right now, they're very small, insignificant groups.
So it sounds like we're going to have a civilization of a lot of heavy drinkers that don't want to pay for it.
That drive horse and buggies. So, Richie, let's talk about what do you think, before I give some statistics, what do you think the country is going to look like? And we've ranted off and on that, that the current generations are not necessarily as strong and as vibrant and as hardworking and as patriotic as past generations. But what do you think the future is going to look like? Whether it's 2050 or 2100, we probably won't be here in 2100. I hope we're here in 2050. You think we'll be here in 2050?
2050.
30 years?
I probably won't.
I'm hoping I'm here in 2050. I'm definitely not going to be here in 2100. That one I know.
Based on my family history, I'm just hoping to get to 80, which doesn't leave me a lot of time.
No, you got there. So what do you think? What do you think the country looks like demographically, Richie, as we go forward?
Well, I see a country taken over by technology, artificial intelligence, all sorts of robotics. Sex robots with blonde wigs. I think you're going to have I think it'll turn kind of like a liberal Europe, where it's it's a carefree nation, less religious nation.
Well, that's for sure.
That
religion's dying, unfortunately.
I think it's going to be very different. Right? I don't think that.
What do you think the work week will be like?
Oh, well, if millennials are correct and they get to execute their 30-hour work weeks and retire by the time they're 35, we're turning into Europe, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. With these 4-day work weeks, I think four-day work week will absolutely be the norm.
Right. You saw where Microsoft tried it in Japan?
Yeah. A lot more vacation. European holidays now 6 weeks through July and August. I think you're going to have a lot more vacation, a lot less dedicated people to their employer. It might be like the 60s peace, love, and rock and roll generation.
But how do you fund that? And that's where I wanted to go last. Is we'll talk about the makeup in a second. But how do you fund that if the country is going that way? And I largely agree with you that Europe is probably 30 or 40 years ahead of the United States, or maybe a little bit more than that. The social safety net is increasing. The birth rates or fertility rates, whatever, are declining. So we're on this affordability collision course. Europe's already seeing it. And so how does that, if that is the world we're headed for, which is lower work weeks, then standard of living has to go down. I mean, I think we're talking about a less affluent United States of America, aren't we?
We are sending the U.S. back 200 years. Where
how about 200?
Maybe socialism will be the norm, or communal living.
Oh boy, that'll precipitate a further decline.
But I've already spoken to some people that said, would it be really that bad? Did you ever see the guy? It's a really cool video from like 1970. The guy that said the heck with the hustle and bustle, of the business world, and he moves to Alaska, and he builds his own log cabin, and he builds his own everything. And then once, I think every 6 months, he'd have a list of supplies that gets flown into him. But he was out there with the bears, ice fishing in the winter.
Right.
Coal stove, fire-driven stove.
Right.
And just, no communications. I could see
he didn't have a family, or did he?
He had a family back home, because I know his children said they were concerned about him.
Right.
I don't know if he was married, or maybe his wife died, or he was divorced. But it's really fascinating. You watch him build everything from start to finish by hand.
Right.
And he lived that way for the rest of his life. So...
And how's that relate to where we're going as a country?
I think a lot of people are going to say, the heck with this. There's a television show now about the custom small homes.
Right.
Where you have an entire home.
Tiny house. Yeah.
Tiny house, right? Yeah, 400 square feet.
Right. A little bigger than this studio.
A little bigger than the studio. And I think people are going to eliminate mortgages by owning a home, a little tiny home. I think they're going to go back to living in the woods and hunting and fresh water out of the creek, and I think we're returning back to indigenous.
Wow.
American Indian.
You're really going off the reservation.
This is a Seinfeld episode.
I know. Which, by the way, was one of our highest rated, the Seinfeld episode. But no, I don't. You think? And by the way, Alaska, you mentioned it. Mike and Julie Smalls have a son that lives up there, and they confirmed it really is the wild frontier still. Alaska. I mean, not a lot of rules. If you're a freedom loving person, which I think I am, Alaska is really an appealing place. I mean, there's not a lot of government rules. You're kind of on your own. You do what you want and that type of thing. So it's just
all kidding aside. I mean, I think partially some of that's possible, but I see communal living where
multi-generational living,
where you pool resources,
right?
Maybe you pay off a mortgage with one larger house with 6 bedrooms. And you have, the parents or the in-laws and maybe a brother and 2 brothers or 2 sisters and their families all kind of living together.
Right. And ultimately, there's just not going to be enough money to go around. If birth rates keep declining, and certainly if we also limit immigration, and the government debt is now just past $23 trillion. Thank you, Donald Trump, for adding $3 trillion on top of it when he said he was going to eliminate the federal deficit in 8 years. He's added $3 trillion on top of it. By the way, that was last show. Should have brought that up. But there's going to be the interest on the debt and the unfunded liabilities are going to overwhelm us. And I agree with you that standard of living will have to decrease because taxes will have to go up or services will have to go down. It's one or the other. Taxes will have to go up. That's most likely what's going to happen. Or the services that we get, the quality of them are going to go down, which means quality of life goes down. So what will the country look like, Richie, from a racial and ethnic makeup? So right now, 2018, I guess this is a Pew survey, 62% white, and that was in 2015, sorry. That in 2065, so 50 years later, that'll drop to 46%. That's the prediction. Hispanic are now 18. That'll go to 24%. And that's one thing that a lot of people predicted that Hispanic birth rate was much higher about 10 years ago. It's actually leveled off as they became more into the workplace as well, some of the factors that we talked about earlier. African American 12, it's only going to 14, so their birth rate's pretty steady. Asians, 6 currently going to 14. And then what I thought was interesting, the foreign-born population is going to go from 47% Hispanic now. 47% of Hispanics are foreign-born. It's going to drop to 31%. Asians going to increase from 26 to 38. Whites are pretty much going to stay the same. Blacks are going to stay pretty much the same. So from an ethnicity standpoint, I don't see Mormons, Amish on there because it's not broken down by
Orthodox Jews.
We don't have the religious breakdown, but you have to believe that those 3 groups are going to increase.
You're missing one big group.
What's that?
Non-identifiable genders.
Yeah, X-gender.
X-gender.
Yeah, that's true.
What percent today?
They're probably 0.00001.
And where are they going to get to?
0.1 maybe.
Okay.
Big increase. All right, Richie. So last part here before we go on to our ending segment. The 2065, I'm going to give you a little quiz. What do you think are what will be the top 5 populated countries in the world in 2065?
Total
population. Yeah, these are Pew, I think Pew projections.
I got to believe China and India are still top 5.
China and India are the top 2. India is expected to more than pass China. China is actually supposed to stay and drop a little bit over the next 50 years because of their birth rate. So they're actually going to drop from 1.2 billion or whatever it is to 1.0 billion, something like that. India could be upwards of 1.7 billion people in India because they don't have the same kind of population issues.
I got to think Russia's
Russia's way down there. Russia's
such
been
a massive
losing
country.
It's been losing population. They're not even going to be in the top they may be in the top 20, but not in the top 10.
The good old US of A has to be up there.
Projected to be fourth. The third one would really surprise you.
Somewhere in Africa?
Yep. Most of the fastest growing countries in the world are all in Africa. Their birth rates are still upwards of 4 and 5 and 6. But Nigeria is projected to have 500 million people by 2065.
They should do well in the Olympics.
They will. If you're a betting man, they should be. Of course, they have lots of other problems in Nigeria. The fifth one, Pakistan. Pakistan by 2065 will be bigger than the United States is now.
That one surprises me. None else. No, I can't even talk now. None of the rest of those stats surprised me.
You knew Nigeria? I didn't know that. I mean, I heard Nigeria was growing. I didn't realize.
I knew there was somewhere in Africa growing massively.
Okay, Indonesia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is next, then Brazil, and then Ethiopia. So they're the top 10 in the world in less than 45 years. So any thoughts on that before we go on to our last segment?
God bless the world.
Very eloquent. All right, Richie. So we're going to do something that we haven't done in a while. And we say once in a while we tell stories when we were idiots. Most of the time that's Richie. But he told me this story a few weeks back. I'd known him for 40 years and never heard it. And I'll set it up like this. It's approaching ski season in a lot of places in the world. And Rich told me a story that I think the listeners would appreciate. And I never even thought of it as a way to economize during ski season. So, Rich, I'll let you tell the story.
So there was about a decade period in my life post-college when I was single. And I was hanging with a bunch of guys with all similar motives and agendas as far as hanging out, partying, renting summer shore homes down in Avalon or Stone Harbor, traveling the world, going to games, golfing, just really living a pretty fun life. And one of my closest friends and a clone to me was a young Paul D. French from the Great White North in Ontario. Great lacrosse player out of UVA, played for the Wings. My exact size. So we could, like women, we could share clothes, and if I needed something to wear, we were the same exact height and weight, the same exact mentality. One day, and he's a good skier. He grew up playing ice hockey. He's a skier. And I was an okay skier. Didn't do it too often, but I could ski. We decided, hey, let's go skiing. We really didn't think the scenario through. And we just got in the car and went down, or I should say went up to the Pocono Mountains. As we were approaching the mountains, we started discussing what we would need. A ski lift ticket. We'd have to rent
boots,
skis
right,
and boots
right.
and poles and that stuff. Oh, and don't you normally need a ski jacket and ski pants and ski gloves?
What were you wearing?
I had one of those like CPO flannel shirt coats and jeans. He, I think, had sweatpants and a sweatshirt. We had no gloves, no hat, nothing. So we kind of looked at each other, and in his...
And you're probably almost there by the time you start thinking about it, right?
Well, it turned into kind of a Beavis and Butthead episode where he turned to me and said, oh, we need ski clothes. And I said, great, there's got to be some ski shops up here that sell that stuff. It would only make sense.
Yeah.
There was nothing. I mean, this is like 7:30 in the morning.
Right.
They're trying to get there early. The only thing open was this Walmart-like store. So we go in, and there was a lot of winter stuff like snow blowers and shovels, and there was hunting gear and rifles.
Of course, up there, yeah.
Tents, and camping gear.
If you wanted to buy a shotgun, no problem.
If we were going hunting, we would have been fine. So we couldn't find anything. We came across the home section. We're like, we're going to get soaking wet if we fall just once. So in one of the home sections, I forget which one of us the light bulb went off, but we saw these industrial trash bags. Those like thick plastic bags that you might
like
use.
Leaf bags and stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And we chose dark black to be because green would have been too obvious. And then we took one bag and we put a hole at the bottom and 2 holes on the side for like a coat. Put it over your head and put your arms out. We took the other one, put 2 holes at the bottom to pull up his pants. We took the belts out of our jeans and tied them around, and we were ready. Makeshift ski outfits, $9.95.
That was for both.
We were looking at each other like.
And if you ripped them, you had a whole other bag, the rest of the bag to replace
that
them.
was the funny part. So we're looking at each other like, oh, this is brilliant. Meanwhile, everybody else was looking at us like we were true idiots.
Right.
But some people said, wow, that's pretty smart. Maybe.
So how many people were like coming up and talking to you, taking pictures? Like, I mean, people must have been looking at you the whole day.
Well, it was almost like a scene from Dumb and Dumber, or what was that show? The Westchester guy that did all the crazy stuff.
Oh yeah, and MTV.
Yeah. So I went. Now he's a better skier than me, but at one point we were going down different hills. He was going down like triple black diamonds. I wasn't.
With his trash bag.
I got down one of the hills first, and I saw him kind of wipe out going around a bend.
Must have been slippery when you hit the snow in those things.
Oh, it's unbelievable. So he's coming down after he fell, and the top trash bag is flailing in the wind from his neck, and the other trash bag is flailing in the wind from his belt because he ripped it off after just a 1 or 2 runs. And he came down the hill and he said, I guess this thing is not going to work.
You didn't go and get more bags out of the car?
No, I think we went in the bar and started drinking.
That's a good story, Richie. And make sure you listen next episode, folks. Rich and I are going to discuss the problem with averages.
With acne?
There's a problem with acne too, but the problem with averages.
Averages.
Yeah. Averages are used in many aspects of our lives, and yet they're problematic in the way that we use them and think about things. And we're going to point out many of the problems with averages in our next episode. And by the way, little teaser, our episode after that, and there's a chance we may get another episode in, but the episode after that is our year 2 in review. So we did this last December, and we had a year in review show. This is going to be our year 2 in review. Can you believe it, Richie? 67 episodes in. We'll be at close to 70 episodes by then, and we're going to get that in before the holiday break. So
shocking.
Looking forward to that. So as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See y'all next episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.
True love won't say goodbye.